Put on some hush puppy shoes. Let's play it one time. Woo!
Now we're going to drop the lead pedal where heavy metal has been discovered. Bob is going to talk us through a band that needs a very limited introduction because they've kind of been around in all kinds of guises, and sometimes the lead singer is almost better known than the band itself. We need to know what's going on with this outfit, Bob. What are you going to tell us?
I'm going to be mirroring Scott here a little bit when he described the history of Yes as a mess. You could apply the same terminology to Black Sabbath. And in their 49-year history, they have changed personnel like some of us would change underwear, particularly lead vocalists. They've had at least 10 lead vocalists during that span and went back and forth or changed vocalists about 16 times. So there's a convoluted history here, and you definitely have to have a scorecard to follow this. We all know Black Sabbath. A lot of people credit them with inventing heavy metal. Like I said, in high school, I really listened to a lot, probably through their first 4 albums, particularly Paranoid. Everybody listened to Paranoid back then, you know, War Pigs, Iron Man. I remember Sweet Leaf, Electric Funeral, all of those great heavy metal dark classics with the Ozman. Ozzy Osbourne, you know, the lead vocalist, was there for the first 9 years or so. And then in 1977, Ozzy left. They have a contract to fill. They've got studio time booked. They have an album they have to do. So Iomni reaches out to an old buddy of his named Dave Walker, brings him in, and they start doing some work in the studio with Walker. And then Ozzy pops back up and says, okay, I want to come back. So they boot Walker out. Ozzy comes in, and they record the album Never Say Die. And they go out on the Never Say Die tour. At the end of the tour, they boot Osbourne out. And now we're talking about 1979, 1980. Ozzy Osbourne is officially gone. And a lot of people are predicting this is the death of Black Sabbath, except for a very fortuitous chance meeting. And Tony Iommi runs into Ronnie James Dio at a bar. Dio has been cut loose from Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. Tony Iommi finds out he's a free agent, so he recruits him for Black Sabbath. And Black Sabbath, like the Phoenix, rises up from the ashes with an album called Heaven and Hell. And it's a heavy metal masterpiece. Ronnie James Dio revitalizes the band. The album's a huge success. Their tours are doing great. And they do another album with Ronnie James Dio. And things are going really, really well until there is a fight with Dio over the release of a live album. And as I understand it, I think there was a fight over whether it would contain more of the Ozzy Osbourne material or the Ronnie James Dio material. So he leaves. So once again, they are without a dynamic lead vocalist. So they recruit Ian Gillan, who was formerly the front person for Deep Purple. Ian Gillan did one album with them. It's a good album. They did the tour, but the tour was marred by a lot of issues. Ian leaves after one album. The band hooks up with Ozzy again for the Live Aid performance in '85, but it's not a permanent reestablishment of ties. So Tony Iommi thinks, hey, you know, going to Deep Purple's well worked once, let's do it again. So he recruits Glenn Hughes to be their new frontman. And they record an album with Hughes and they go out on tour, which is an unmitigated disaster. Because as Iommi says, Hughes did 10 times more coke than I did. And Hughes was so screwed up that there were times he couldn't even take the stage on the tour. So they sacked him halfway through the tour, and they bring in somebody named Ray Gillan, who was fronting a bar band in New York. And they bring him in to finish out the tour. He leaves after the tour is over. Then they bring in somebody named Tony Martin, and he actually does 3 albums with the band, but supposedly it was pretty lean time for the band. They were reduced down now to playing in clubs rather than arenas. But here rears, after the 3 albums with Tony Martin, we get Ronnie James Dio, who comes back, and he records an album with them called Dehumanizer. And fans were thrilled to see Ronnie James Dio back. And the tour that they did was a huge success. But then more problems arise because they decide to go to one of Ozzy Osbourne's Ozfests, and they're going to share the stage with Ozzy. Well, Ronnie James Dio doesn't like this, and he leaves, and they're without a singer for these Ozfest shows. So in steps Rob Halford from Judas Priest, and he does the 2 shows with Black Sabbath. Then Ozzy came back for a while, and this is his 3rd return to the band. And then they do a thing called the Retirement Sucks Tour. But then Ozzy leaves again, and Tony Martin comes back, and he does a couple more years with the band. Then in 97, Ozzy comes back for the 4th time to Black Sabbath, and he goes out on the road with them. And they tour the world, headline arenas again. Everything is going great. But then Ozzy leaves again, and now Ronnie James Dio comes back. And the group that he recorded under was actually technically called Heaven and Hell, but it was Black Sabbath because it had all the same people as previously. So it counts as a Black Sabbath album. And they go out on another tour, and they did only Ronnie James Dio material, nothing from the Osbourne era, but still the tour's a big success. And things are looking good for the band again, but then sadly, Ronnie James Dio develops stomach cancer and dies. So now Ozzy makes his 5th return to the band in 2011, and they record an album in 2013 called 13, and then they formally disbanded in 2017. So that is a brief look at the convoluted history of Black Sabbath. They had some, during that 49-year history, with all of these personnel changes, all of these different lead singers coming and going, they had some really big high points. The ones I'm personally aware of, the early era of Black Sabbath, probably the first 3 or 4 albums. The others kind of fell down then. The Ronnie James Dio stuff, Ian Gillan, then Ronnie James Dio back. Those were some high points, some of the other very low points. And then, of course, they had this on again, off again history with Ozzy Osbourne. So that's where Black Sabbath is now. They're no longer together. They ended their era. So they had a good run from 1968 through 2017, 1 year shy of a full 50-year history. But speaks to the endurance of Tony Iommi to go through all of this for all of those 5 decades.
Well, thanks, Bob. When you have a band that has that much turnover over so many years, I'm intrigued by the notion that the band name is almost more valuable than the personnel. I mean, it's just an interesting concept to me because, you would think at some point everybody could escape from the weight of that legacy and just kind of do stuff, even with the same personnel, but not be encumbered by expectations or a legacy that you can't live up to, or that you're diminishing by your protracted playing with it, essentially.
And that, and you've got Ozzy Osbourne out there doing a very successful solo career.
Right.
Producing the same kind of music that Black Sabbath's producing, doing a lot of times the same material. Because, Ozzy is when he's performing, he's mining classic Black Sabbath, and Black Sabbath is out there with a different singer mining classic Black Sabbath, so yeah, interesting, especially when
Yeah, I mean, it's an intriguing thing. I guess the fans in the end, they decide what matters and what doesn't.
Well, put down your Playboy, put on some hush puppy shoes. Let's play it one time. Woo!